name is Paola Boucher. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator of the Texas Language Center, and this event, the task of the Sanskrit Translator, is part of our International Education Week, so thank you so much for coming, and I welcome you on behalf of our center and our director, Dr. Garza, who could not be here today. I will introduce both of our speakers, Dr. Manasisha Apia Pornchai. Her area of research focuses on the intellectual history of South Asia during the medieval and early modern periods. She's specifically interested in studying the role of religion, philosophy, and multilingualism in religious and intellectual communities, particularly in South India. She was first drawn to the study of South Asian languages and literature at the Faculty of Arts, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, where she studied Pali before moving on to Sanskrit. She has an impressive resume that you can look it up. She has 3 books, and she works on a lot of things, including co-editing the volume with University of Toronto and the University of Florida, and she's a really accomplished author. So Daniel Cuneo, before his current position, hold an equivalent of associate professor in Sanskrit and Indian civilization at the Université Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris, where he kept his academic chair. After obtaining his PhD on Indian aesthetic theories at the University of Rome La Sapienza, he worked in 3 top-notch European universities: Vienna University on Sanskrit logic, Cambridge University within a project on manuscript studies, and Leiden University as a Sanskrit lecturer. His research interests embraced the Sanskrit intellectual and literary cultures with a particular focus on poetry and aesthetics, although his area of expertise branched out into epistemology, linguistic philosophy, debates among Brahmins, Buddhists, and Jains, and conversation between tradition and postmodernity. I'm really, really excited about this talk because I'm very interested in translation, so welcome both of you, and thank you for being here.
Okay, so I guess I'll get started first. So we have basically 3 parts of our talk today. We will start with the introduction, and I will just, quickly introduce myself one more time, and then also talk about the courses and why I became interested in translation. And then Daniele Cuneo will also come up and then introduce himself, and then talk about Sanskrit and also the compositions and its literary world, which is the focus of our talk today. So let's see. Then in the content, we will talk about 2 parts. The first one is actually about poetry by Daniele, and then I will take care of scholastic and commentarial texts. So just before the content part, we will also have some theoretical reflections related to not only Sanskrit world, but also the Western theories of translation. And then we'll just conclude. And we hope to take around only 45 minutes, more or less. So these are also the courses that I'm teaching in Asian Studies department at UT. So as you can see, there is actually one course called Translating Asia. And in that course, I actually explore different theoretical frameworks from both the East and the South. And I try to ask the question, so whether or not it actually makes sense for us who work with texts in Asian context to use and incorporate a lot of Western theories, and what might be the pros, what might be the cons of doing that. So in addition to that, I have various courses related to different Hindu religious traditions, as you can see here. Finally, I am responsible at the moment for teaching advanced Sanskrit, which is basically 3rd year Sanskrit. So we normally offer 3 years Sanskrit at a time: 1st year, 2nd year, and then 3rd year. And then for during the 3rd year, this is where we encounter a lot more problems when it comes to translation and how to approach different texts in Sanskrit at that level. I will also talk about later. So I'll hand it over to you. From there, sorry, that's just my book that might be coming out soon. So let's actually just keep that. The timeline is not too certain. So.
Thank So thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I also have a slide with my name and the courses that I'm teaching here at UT. As you see, I take care of a lot of the first year, second year Sanskrit, so really the fight against the language with the younger students who want to learn. That's always a struggle for everybody, and that's understandable. And then I teach two courses that are two content courses in translation, and especially in the second one, and love poetry in Primordial South Asia, we encounter mostly, although not only, Sanskrit texts in translations that I read with the students. And my main job in that course is to show how much translation can be adequate and how much they can be inadequate, and all the struggles to that, showing the original, of course, in a language that the students don't know. So that is an ongoing challenge. I think I can say something more about me. My 1 minute pitch, elevator pitch, is like that I work at the intersection of poetry and philosophy in the pre-modern South Asian culture. That's really like if there's only one floor. If it's more than one floor, I say something more, and that exactly as also the introduction said, I mostly focus on aesthetics and philosophy of language, and so how Indian authors conceptualized their own literature, their own language, and how basically poetry influenced philosophy and philosophy influenced poetry. I have now kind of the strange duty of introducing the Sanskrit literary culture, I would say literally, and intellectual culture in 2 minutes, which is quite impossible. I just pulled out the Wikipedia page and looked at what does it say about Sanskrit. It says that it's one of the oldest, as far as attestation goes, Indo-European language, and it's the sacred language of Hinduism, all good. But let me exaggerate a bit more. I would say that the role of Sanskrit in South Asia and beyond South Asia, like including parts of Southeast Asia and Asia at large, has been in the last 3 millennia the same role that Hebrew, Greek, and Latin together had played for Europe. So the Sanskrit literary intellectual tradition covered that much ground. So not only in literature in the sense of fine arts, poetry, dramas, but also scholarly literature, philosophy, everything from medicine to erotics, astronomy to agricultures. It's all, has been written for more than 1,000 years in Sanskrit, which was the language of culture. Of course, there were many other languages in South Asia. I don't want to speak against them or diminish their importance, but we're talking mostly about Sanskrit today. We'll see there will be also something else. So religion, literature, philosophy for at least 2,000 years. And I cannot play with this idea of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, because also Sanskrit is a language that at some point in its history got frozen. So Panini, around the 4th century BCE, wrote a grammar that established what Sanskrit is, and Sanskrit didn't change. Okay, it changed a little bit, but almost didn't change for the following, up to now, actually. Up to even now, there are pundits, Sanskrit scholars who write poems in Sanskrit, and that's why we can read a literature which is absolutely immense. Let's say that this is enough, and I'll move again. It's kind of a dance here.
Okay. So before we jump into our materials, I just feel like it's worth reflecting on the world of translation at large, and also what we struggle with in the Sanskrit context, basically. So just a little bit about the history of translation in relation to Sanskrit texts. So there is no single evident clear word in Sanskrit that can actually be used to translate the English term translation that we're so used to nowadays as a way by which we actually signify a word or render a word in one language into another. So that is not how they perceive translation. So in Sanskrit culture, especially during the pre-modern period, translation can be understood as a commentarial act That is what we might call nowadays, meaning and also paraphrasing and even adaptation. So in that context, fidelity or faithfulness to the original was not necessarily one of the main requirements or expectations, unlike in the current situation that we're dealing with. So during the colonial period and after, however, the translation of Sanskrit texts faced many challenges due to Orientalist conceptions of what should be considered the canon of classical Indian literature, or more so Sanskrit literature. So in addition, translations from this period tend to produce and reproduce kind of bad or condemning opinions of India, its culture, as well as its Hinduism as a religion. So another difficulty, as John Emick in this article that I'm showing you here illustrates, is that, and I quote from him, the vast majority of Indian religious texts remains untranslated or uncritically rendered, unquote. And this, we cannot stress more. I basically can just pick up a text sometime that I found in a library or a manuscript collection at some point in Chennai, India, and I would realize that nobody has worked on this for at least 50 years, if not longer than that. No translation whatsoever. And then I became the person who actually just discovered that text or that whole collection or a corpus. And then whatever I say is actually new because there are just so many untranslated Sanskrit texts. And so this is actually definitely clear that why translation is actually so important to the field of Sanskrit studies and how critical today's conversation is. So the title of today's talk, of course, is based on the influential article by Walter Benjamin, The Translator's Task, or the Task of the Translator, however you want to put it. So one of the main issues raised by the author there concerns translatability, or that is what actually allows a text to be translated. And he also proposes that translation can be seen as the afterlife or the survival, in the sense that, I quote, a translation, no matter how good, cannot have any significance or for the original, unquote. And also, if I were to add, quoting again, the original's life achieves is constantly renewed, latest, and most comprehensive unfolding, unquote. That is to say, I think translation can never be the same as the original. Rather, it is a transformation or what some scholars who are also reading him might say an echo of it, of the original. So ultimately, Benjamin links translation to pure language. That's another whole story that I don't want to get into. I would just say, translation is what we care about. So although the translator's task, or the task of translator by Benjamin, focuses on the Western domain, it can also shed light on conversation related to translation in the South Asian context. And that's basically what I was doing in my course on translating Asia. So, for example, just to give you two, Martha Selby, who used to teach also at UT, draws on Benjamin's framework to explore issues related to, again, what can be translated and what cannot be in the context of Indian poetry, especially Sanskrit poetry. And so this is actually her work that I'm drawing from. Let's see. Sorry, that is the one we want. There we go. So basically in this article, which is quite interesting and experimental, she highlights the poet's intention when considering translatability in the Indian context. And she selects 3 passages of poetry that reflect different translation problems, which we will also hopefully discuss also in our cases, especially for Daniela's part about poetry. So finally, the author suggests that we should remain, quote unquote, open but informed when interpreting Sanskrit texts. However, it remains quite uncertain and unclear how open one can truly be when dealing with texts so far removed from us in both time and culture. So finally, just looking at the same topic of translation and what can be translated in relation to the Tamil side, which is another major literary culture in India, related also to Sanskrit. So this is the piece by A.K. Ramanujan, a translator and scholar of Tamil literature, and he identifies certain elements that are quite interesting. And he called them the impossibilities, meaning the elements that are actually impossible to translate, as shown here. So I would argue that we face similar challenges and we have to deal with these impossibilities when translating Sanskrit texts as well, whether they be scholastic works like śāstra, which is what I'm dealing with most of the time, or kāvya, or poetry that Daniela will be walking you through. So in this talk, we hope to explore certain domains of impossibility and hopefully some possibility, not in order not to provide a solution, but to reveal the moments of negotiation and decision-making that are critical to, and we argue, should be made transparent during the translating process, and more importantly, after, with the end result or the finished product, whatever you might want to call that. So in the second part of this talk, we focus on our experience and the problems we face when translating Sanskrit poems and scholastic works, along with their commentaries, and we will start with poetry. So.
I like this little dance. So, following in a way what A.K. Ramanuja wrote in that article, I created my 5 dimensions of Sanskrit untranslatabilities. If you want, it's kind of a different take on this idea of possibilities and impossibilities, and I came up with some fancy terms that I made up. Maybe they don't exactly work, all of them. It was just to illustrate some aspect of Sanskrit culture and Sanskrit poetry, in particular, that do pose challenges to translator. I call them phonic density, inflectional suspension, compositional unsynonymity. Okay, multilingualism is understandable, and then semantic embrace and extreme poetry. So let's go through them. Let's see what I have first. Maybe I'll have to move because I'll have to read the verse in Sanskrit to make it understandable what I'm talking about. So this is a verse from a text that I'm working on with a colleague of mine, the Khatga Shataka, which is basically a poem on a sword. On the sword of a god. Krishna, in some cases, we're still working through it, so that I'm not certain about all this. But this is just the first verse. I will read it for you. Kalpati krura kala brukuti kuti lata kalpa kalpa gramushti krudyat kali katakshang katika iva kalayan kamti me kantakalim kridatyasya kramena kakachakriti kriti kumbi kumbagrakuta krodishutkrita kantot tira rudirakana kirnako nakripana. Sorry, that was my best, but I think you get the idea. No, I mean, we tried a translation. I can read it as if adorned by its crossguard, curved like the contracted brow of cruel Kala. At the end of time, it assumes an absolute black splendor, as though branded by a sidelong lance from a sulking Kali, master at hacking straight down the middle of the crest between elephants' temples. His sword, edge splattered with blood, gushing from severed throats, blaze. So that's you know what I'm getting at, right? I mean, the phonic texture of the text is basically a repetition of these very harsh sounds. And if you notice, it's basically all k. And part of the game of this poem is to use all k in the first verse, then it will be another letter in the second one. I mean, it's not one of those cases, and we look at them, in which the poet really wants to use only one sound, but what I'm getting at here, beside the, let's say, the convention or the constraint that the poem is putting onto himself, is really the emotional and the situational value that the sounds have. This curve, this kraka-chaka-takriti, it's kind of the sound of the sword that is hitting. And I mean, something like that is extremely hard to render in a translation, and you clearly lose something. I don't think I have many solutions. I mean, we tried in the translation a little bit. We came up with a cross-guard curve, like the contracted brow of cruel color. We added some to give some of it, but of course, English language simply cannot afford to do, at least to translate poetry like that. I mean, there are cases of poetry composed like that, but doing a translation is too hard. Do I have more on phonic density? Yes, I do. And this is absolutely the most extreme. It's beyond phonic density. It's fully wordplay, punning. It's what in Sanskrit is called chitra kāvya, something like flashy poetry, and there are so many kinds of that. It's very, very often it's about writing poetry that can be read in different direction or read up and down or in a shape. So clearly something like that is completely untranslatable. And this is a famous example from Maga's Shishupalabhada, in which the poet uses only one letter to compose. But I mean, even for a very, very accomplished Sanskritist, which is not me, I say in general, this is impossible to read on its own. You need a commentary because all the words are I don't want to say they're exactly made up, but they are constructed using that commentarial jargon, the lexica, looking up for words that are very extreme, because, I mean, how could a language have a verse like da-da-do-da-do-da-dee, I cannot read it. It's like, I'm not good enough to do that. And you see, and the meaning has nothing in particular, it's just part of the story. So, of course, but I would argue that this is not even about, in the case before, I mean, there is a point in that specific k sound and the connection with the sword, and in many other verses like that. So there is kind of an emotional connection between sound and meaning. And just as an aside, one of the oldest definitions of Sanskrit poetry is sound and meaning combined. Which, if you think about it, like, okay, but that is language. Language is just sound and meaning combined. But one possible interpretation is to go in this direction, that you have to find sounds that somehow will mirror what the poetry is about. So harsh sounds for a battle, or maybe sweet sounds for a love, romance. So that we can try to find a translation to justify it. Verses like this are just intranslatable because it's just about the play with language and about the Sanskrit language. So for something like that, I give up at least. What do I have next? So next I wanted to talk about this inflectional suspension. So Sanskrit, as I said, is an ancient Indo-European languages, and most Indo-European languages, and definitely the most ancient, are flexional languages in the sense that verbs change, and subject, object, and the different parts of speech are categorized in cases. So you have the nominative, the accusative, like German, if you know German, unlike English when there are no cases, which means that the order of the words is not fixed like in English. Sanskrit in theory is an SOV language, so it's subject, object, verb, but you can turn them around freely because the end of the word will always tell you what is the function of that word. And so, for instance, we have, let me see if I can do this magic light. Yes. So I have the last word here, kripana, which is in the nominative, and it's the subject, and it's at the very end. And while the verb is there, and his is there. And of course, this is extremely hard to render in a translation in a language in which the order of word is fixed. But it has, and it does have, an aesthetic function. The idea that only at the end, when you read everything, you actually know what it's talking about. Oh, it was a sword, especially at the beginning of the poem. Maybe this is not the best example for that because, well, in the title, there is a sword. But very often, the idea of postponing important information will force the reader to have to read the poem again. And that is kind of the point of some poems like that, to be a riddle, that you really don't understand what is being talked about till the end, and then you have to reread it. That's something that, again, in the translation can be somehow mimicked, but to a point in languages like that. And I think there is a value. And for that, we could offer some solutions, and many solutions have been offered. Very often there are graphic solutions when you go to a new line, or you get spaces and you understand, so what's the connection between the different adjectives and nouns. But just I want to highlight that this is something that a poet cared about. So we have to try to translate it, when you talked about translating intention, or at least try to recognize that it's important, and then decide whether, okay, we'll translate that, or we'll translate something else, we'll put it in a note. That this is, in the end, this is kind of the trade-off that is always there with translation, and something that, I mean, my personal solution, maybe for the whole talk, I should keep this for the end maybe. No, I'll say it now, is that there should be more translations for the same text by more people, and some people will focus on one, and some people will focus on another thing, and that's really the only solution. Or, of course, everybody should learn Sanskrit, but that's another story. Where are we? Inflectional suspension. What did I make up with? Okay, this compositional unsynonymity here, I was trying to kind of squeeze together too many things, and I don't think that the result was very pithy as I wanted. But what's the story here? So Sanskrit is a language that has a huge vocabulary, like very, very big, like English if you want. English is also like that. On top of that, you can create compounds. And these compounds can multiply the vocabulary basically ad infinitum. My example is the moon, and the moon, I mean, there is a story of the moon here, but I will not focus on that. If you don't know what it is, Google it. So the moon is, as far as the culture is concerned, and that's why I have the cultural epithets up here, has cool rays. Of course, you have to think about the Indian summer in the first millennium without AC. When the moon comes out and the sun is gone, it's very nice. So the moon is a good thing. And you can call it moon. There are words for moon in Sanskrit. Or you can call it with any combination of words that mean cold, snow, frost, anything that is kind of cool, and any word for light, for luster, for splendor, for shining, for rays, and you would understand that that's the moon. So we have here, what do I have? I have hima, which is more or less snow, shita, cold, tuhina is maybe frost, diditi and duty, they are all light, splendor, amsha and rashmi are rays. And so you have all this combination, and you could have more, and all these mean moon. If you want, there are slightly different resonances. So one is the, how do you say, like the snowy, splendid moon, or the cool rayed moon, or the frosty rayed moon, or the, I don't know, cool, splendid moon. I mean, there are different things. So in the translation, one could either just go with moon or make it very heavy and give the whole translation, say just the cool rayed one, and there are different techniques. But at the end of the day, it will sound a bit heavy in English. It might not be beautiful, and one has, again, it's a trade-off. Sometimes you just say, okay, it's moon. In other cases, maybe in most cases, hard to say, the choice is meaningful. If you're talking about the rays, because the rays of the moon have a specific function, sometimes they open and they close. They make some certain lotuses open and close. So again, I'm presenting challenges, and again, my solution is just have 20 translations of everything. I mean, we don't have translations of anything, so my solution is completely uneconomical, let's say. So that was number 3, I think. Was that number 3? I'm not sure anymore. But anyway, multilingualism. So as we say, we were focusing on Sanskrit, but as I said, I mean, not only Sanskrit, and then Bhāṇa mentioned Tamil as well. One issue with South Asian culture, and actually with most cultures in the world that were not the, like, countries in Europe when this myth of the nation state was created, and this idea of one country, one nation, one language, it was never like that. Mankind has, not I want to say always, but most of the time lived in multilingual environment. Sanskrit theater is my example here, because in Sanskrit theater, multilingualism is embedded in the structure, in the rules themselves, to the point that high person of high class, high-born characters, there is the whole issue of caste behind that, of course, speak Sanskrit. As I said, language of culture, of religion, of philosophy, of politics, all that. While women and commoners, let's use this word, speak different forms of Prakrit, so other languages that have evolved out of Sanskrit historically, and they're the languages like as if in I don't know, in some dramas in Europe there is Latin and some people speak proper Latin. I'm thinking dramas in the 15th century, while others can speak other form of, let's say, less correct Latin. Or we have that, of course, this kind of problem of register is there in all languages, all literature, but here it's like the division is really a linguistic division. It's hard to understand one language. I mean, clearly people could follow, but the difference of language was important. So what do we do in something like that? Here I have a verse in the famous love story of Shakuntala and Dushyanta, and Shakuntala, who is like really a young girl, a teenager, is in love and writes on a leaf a love letter. And the love letter sounds, I'm not very good at singing Prakrit, but it's something like Tujjana anehya mama una kamo divaviratimi nigginata vabaliyam tui vuttamanora himmangaim, something. And you already kind of hear and feel the difference between this and that krita chakrita krita that was Sanskrit. I mean, that was an extreme example, but this is clearly a language, the Prakrit language, and especially this form of Prakrit, a language of sweetness, of tenderness. It means to do that. How do you do it in a translation? I mean, here I have a translation, your heart, I didn't know, cruel one, beloved in life, painful in flames, and so on. It's completely lost if you translate everything in English. You know The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons in Italian, I'm from Italy, when they're translated, like the different characters, the way they speak is translated in different Italian dialects. So this could be a way, like, I mean, I'm not an English mother tongue enough to do something like that. I tried, let me see, I tried this, which was Scottish. I didn't ken your heart, you cruel one, but love sets mine burning day and night, but it has naught but longing for you. But that's kind of wrong. It doesn't give the right feeling. I should probably, maybe, I mean, it's a sweet one. This let's sound like a Viking, a bad Viking, because my Scottish accent is null, obviously. Sorry. But there is a point there. No, maybe I should have tried some Midwestern sweet accent or some Texan accent, but here I'm here, so I haven't tried that at all. But there is something like that in the feel for the audience. No, that suddenly there is a different language, which is a language that embodies sweetness and delicacy in the language itself, not even in the word. I mean, I was playing here, but you got my idea. What do I have? So this was number 4. Number 5 is kind of the most complicated because it goes deep into the literary culture of the Sanskrit episteme, if you want to say it like that, of the Sanskrit literary tradition. Let me read this too. Yatsadu yatvam sutaram sasarja prajapatih kamaniva sasarja tvam manjaribi pravaro vananam netrotvascha sisayao vananam. You see that there is basically what we'd call a rhyme, although that's not the point. The point is not that it's a rhyme. The point is that it's a yamaka, a twinning. So the words are repeated, but always with different meanings. I've tried here to highlight how you actually translate the sounds, sasarja and sarja in different ways, or vananam and sayau vananam in different ways. That's one of the figures of speech in classical Sanskrit poetry. Absolutely impossible to render in English. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, and it's possible to find some way of doing it. I didn't even try here. I think I probably took this translation from somebody. Sorry, anybody. And this is just the easiest point, because what is called the semantic embrace is actually my next point. And here I will not read the verse also because I'm starting to get kind of tight on time. But it is that the embrace is an embrace between two meanings. And the same strings of sounds mean two completely different ways. Again, to represent this, there are a lot of ways. People do them with colors, with different lines, doing two translations. Here I've done the worst possible solution to give you what one you shouldn't do. So the idea is that it's a poem on the Buddha, and may he alone protect you, the conqueror, who is unaffected by soldiers and the breasts of lovely women. And then there are a series of qualifications that are for both the soldiers and the breasts. And here I just put the two options in square brackets. That's the worst way, yeah? But there are ways, but I'm just saying that they're also not that good. I mean, they will never give you the feel of the original in which your mind kind of switches between the two meanings and you don't get something and then you have to read it again and say, okay, how can that refer to that? And so they are brilliant with spotless drawn scimitars, and that's the soldiers. And then there are the nipples of whose spotless circles gleam when revealed. You see like words, different words that have different meanings, whose chests are girded, whose chests are full blown, and there are different kinds of chests. You can read the rest and you can get the idea. I mean, if you're not Sanskritist, it's hard to, I mean, I could spend more time on this, but again, you got the idea of how the two can, and I have a couple of more slides on this to give you the feeling. And again, quite impossible, quite hard. I have the colleague who wrote a book called Extreme Poetry, is a Yigal Bronner. He is extremely good and has attempted to do some of translations which this Shlesha kind of bubbles up also in the translation, and you see it in the English in a way that, I mean, it's the opposite of this. But of course, it's unlikely, if not impossible, that you can do that fully and with that same intensity. I would say it's completely impossible in the case, let me see if I have one more. I should have one more, maybe this way. Yes, in the case of what becomes Shlesha Kāvya, so Shlesha is this embrace. In the case of Shlesha Kāvya, the whole poem is an embrace. So the whole poem tells two different stories. The classical example is the story of the Mahabharata and the story of the Ramayana, and I'm taking the example from this article by Sylvain Broquet, Dialogisme du double sens. After this article, he actually recently published a French translation of the whole Raghava Pandavya, in which basically he translates every verse twice. Let me show if that kind of helps. Again, I could read it. Okay, let's not read the Sanskrit, but let's look at the idea. So he whom the enemy had previously abandoned, full of arrogance because of the army he had received by destiny, the terrible Purushottama whom his adversary could not subdue, joyfully followed him. So we have words, terrible Purushottama, which are up there in the Sanskrit, Purushottama, and terrible is Vibhishana. And Purushottama here is Krishna. Terrible, Vibhishana just means terrible. But if you go here, then the same idea is expressed, the different idea is expressed with the same sounds, because what happens is chased from the city by the enemy, who was full of arrogance. Of course, some parts are the same. Because of the power he had received from fate, Vibhishana, whom his adversary could not subdue, that excellent being, joyfully followed him. And this case is Rama. Vibhishana is in the Ramayana. I will not tell the whole story, but he's a brother of Ravana that basically changes side and goes and help Rama. So you see the technique. I want to focus on that. Like, Vibhishana and Purushottama are both either proper name or adjectives in Sanskrit of qualifications. And so you can read that as the terrible Purushottama, and then it's a character in the Mahabharata, or as the excellent being Purushottama, who is Vibhishana. And then in this way, the whole 20 sargas, 20 cantos or so, tells two stories at the same time. And the stories are there are parallels, there are exiles, there are battles, there is love, but the stories are very different. And so also other words must have, if you want, different meaning. And so the same word can mean chaste, but also abandon. The same meaning can be army, but also power, because in one case, the Kaurava accepted the army, and while the Pandavas would have Krishna, but in the other case, it's Ravana who has the power given by fate. I mean, there is a whole story, and of course, only if you know the story, and only if you read the commentaries, there is more than one, you could figure out something like that. Here I'm going towards the really impossibility of translations. Last slide for me. Get ready. So what do I do with these things? I don't know, but I want to highlight what they do for the readers, for Sanskrit readers. So the phonic density uses this emotional and playful alliterations, or anyway, uses of sounds that express something. Inflectional suspension has this idea of the surprise, and you have to decode, and it's even if you are a Sanskrit mother tongue, sometimes you have to read it more than once to figure out where things are get together. Of course, we're talking about poetry. Again, the compositional find a better name is about the nuances and the really infinite connotations, and also just about fitting words into a meter, because that's also why they use different words and different names for the same things, because you have a meter and sometimes you need to fill seven syllables, so you need a long moon, and you just have a word that has more combine of different words. Again, multilingualism is about studying social complexity. I mean, all this, you can fill up the book with notes, so you can explain it in a class. But it does, I want to see translation that manage to do all of this, to solve all this together. I mean, the semantic embrace, the extreme poetry, I mean, there, again, it's when the language plays with itself at a level that I think that that's kind of the ultimate threshold of untranslatability. And mic drop.
Okay, so let's see. I have only 3 more examples, and they're definitely shorter. And I do also have the issue with the way maybe you translate shlisha as embrace. But maybe we should talk more about that. This is actually issues of translation in real life. So, okay, so let's see what I have here. So I have 3 examples to talk to you about today. The first one is the translation is how to translate the Yoga Sutra, just because I wanted to highlight the fact that in Sanskrit we also have this genre called sutra. However you want to translate it, according to Daniele, the best translation is. Okay, that I'm still doubting and I'm still questioning, and we'll keep working on that. Anyway, so this is basically a short, right, passage, short form, short verse. Sometimes it contains only one word, sometimes it contains more than one, and in the case that we will be looking at is actually Yoga Sutra 1-2. That's supposed to be the definition of yoga, but then how can you actually know what yoga means when you cannot even translate these 4 words for real? And really get what they mean. So that is the first one. The second and the third one are actually closer to my research and also the class that I'm working, that I'm teaching. So let's start with the Yoga Sutra, and let's see if I actually have a verse for you. This is more or less the idea. So let me go back one more time. So according to David Gordon White, who actually wrote the entire book called the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, in the first chapter, he actually points out a problem that is we cannot quite solve, and is also a problem related to translation. It might not be pretty hard for you to see, but basically that is the idea. So I would just want to show you how many ways one can actually translate 4 words that actually are part of the second verse of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So the 4 words are yoga, citta, vritti, nirodha, right? So as you can see, for each line, you actually have 4 columns. And these are supposed to be all the possible translations of each word within that. So according to our author here, and he said that the actually most literal translation that he would go for is as follows. Yoga is the restraint of fluctuations of the mind. That is kind of the definition. But then again, with this literal translation, we still have so many problems. So what kind of cessation or restraint we're talking about? What does it mean for real? Is it temporary or permanent? Is it practical goal? Or is it just philosophical description? Or both? Or what about the fluctuation of the mind? And the text does not necessarily spell this out. It assumes that maybe sometimes a teacher, a tradition, we're talking about back then around the 2nd century BCE, and then also the commentary tradition that came after in the Premian period, right? So a translator in this case has to make these decisions often behind the scenes. Yet, their decisions actually really shape the way the text is understood or being echoed, just to play with that word again. So one thing that becomes quite clear is that translating a sutra like this is always an interpretive act. So you cannot simply translate word for word, or sometimes you can, but you cannot quite assume people would actually understand or get the same knowledge that you want them to do. Especially in this case when, each word has so much for you and the readers to unpack already. So what can you do in that scenario? Do we decide to actually preserve the compact, almost mysterious nature of the original in this case? Or do we actually expand it and make it understandable to someone encountering it in English for the first time? So I guess both choices are valid, and I tend to agree with Daniela in this case that let's actually welcome different interpretations and translations, because I feel like, one choice actually gives something and the other actually gives different meanings also. And in any case, each translation kind of shapes the reader's experience in different way. So that is the first case. Let me actually see the next one. So the next one, I would like to explore how to translate the concept of svarasya, which is a abstract noun, and also its adjective, its adjectival form, which is svarasa. So basically, this, I think, is something that is quite close to the idea of intention in Walter Benjamin's The Translator's Task. And according to one dictionary, the only dictionary that we use a lot, so let me actually just digress a bit now. One problem when it comes to translation has to do with dictionaries. So we have this dictionary that we've been using for many years. And sometimes the translation, the word given as a translation can be quite ancient and not updated enough. And also, most of the time, we just don't know what to say because this is what this is what we see when we look up a word. Like there are some words that I think I've never used it anywhere else except when translating Sanskrit, like creeper or any other terms like that. But we still have to work with these dictionaries because these are what we have. So when I look up this dictionary, which is quite authoritative, svarasya, the first word means naturalness, self-evidence, and so on. And it can actually describe the taste of food, plants, fruits, and other things that we can actually touch and experience and sense. But in the work that I'm doing, that is actually just about this word, I actually just submitted a draft, and also let's hope that there will be good comments back about this. So in that paper, I talk about this idea not as something along those lines, but as a term that appears in the hermeneutic sense. So the earliest use of the term can be found from around the 7th century text, Gumarala Tantravartika. And so in my article, I explore this principle, concept, whatever you want to call it, as it appears in selected texts from that first occurrence up to roughly the 18th century. So I wanted to see its continuities and also changes in this hermeneutic framework. So the main problem I was facing when I was writing this paper is how can I actually translate this? Shall I say just, I don't know, natural meaning? I guess, shall I say evident meaning? I probably wouldn't say, because we're talking about hermeneutics, I wouldn't necessarily want to go for tasteful meaning or something like that. But this is basically the concept that every word, every sentence, every part of a language has something there as the most simplest and clearest and direct meaning that we're supposed to get. So all these intellectual authors writing in Sanskrit, trying to use this as a principle to claim that scripture should be saying this, because that is the svarasya or svarasa way of understanding or interpreting the text, right? So let me just complicate the story by saying that according to some authors, let's see what we have. According to some authors, here is the kind of the way it's supposed to work. And here I kind of already chose my translation as naturally. But let's see the definition. So the sentence that functions naturally should indeed refrain from any meanings that are clearly useless. And the second one, the statements of those with wrong views like Shankara, ignore the names, and others were already refuted by Ramanuja's Gita Bhashya. So the second part is what we care about. Their words contain faults noticeable even to a child. Since all their meanings are suppressed, therefore we do not attempt to refute them here. So the second part, the last bit that is about a child, is our focus here. So this passage is being used by this author, Vedānta Deśika, to say that there is the meaning that is varasa and there is the meaning that is being suppressed. Like in such a way that even a child would actually know. So also the reference to a child, I think, is quite telling and revealing, because I think we can then assume that this is the principle that is also accessible by just a kid who maybe just got some education about what language is and then managed to just read some stuff. But even for that kid, that kid actually knows the real kind of meaning of each text. So in the end, I actually just went through this whole analysis and then reread the whole paper, my own paper, and then I settled with natural or naturalness or natural meaning as the translation. But I just wanted you to get the process that sometimes that's what it takes for us to actually go to the end before we can actually come back and then see what's going on. So the last case will be quite fast. Sorry, I never know how to work this thing. Okay, here. So the last case is actually coming from the advanced Sanskrit class. So we're reading Kālidāsa's Kumara Sambhava, this quite well-known Sanskrit poetry. And it is about Shiva and Parvati, his consort, and they're basically the story is Parvati is trying to win Shiva's heart. But then she cannot do that just by her beauty, because Shiva is the lord of austerities, and then that is kind of what he's expecting. So Parvati, kind of a princess, decided to just abandon her palace and then went to the forest to do this very intense practice to win the man of her heart. So we're reading Canto 5, which is one of the most beautiful one, for sure. And then we have some problems, because sometimes we have verses that can actually not be translated quite easily. And as a result, sometimes we rely on the commentary. And this is basically the verse that is used as an example and the commentary. So what you can see here, let's see if I can press anything. So this part is the verse, and this part right here, starting from this, is the commentary. And as you can see that sometimes you will see this danda or this line break here, which kind of represents the break also of a sentence. But then notice how many lines and breaks we have in this. And this is the nature of a commentary, right? You kind of have the embedded gloss also sometimes, like divam means svargam. And you can see this divam is actually put in bold. And then the question is how to actually translate this commentary and represent all of these features that you have, especially the fragmented nature that the commentary is supposed to have and show. So in the end, in the end, this is kind of a very rough, literal way that we did in class. I mean, again, this is not polished by any means. I just wanted to show you that this is how fragmented we want. And of course, this is an ongoing process that we're still dealing with. And we wanted to capture everything, the gloss, the fragmented nature of it, and also all the other parts. So let me also conclude real quick that, as you can see, we treat translation as an ongoing conversation between, somewhere near that we are and also the far, far away culture of Sanskrit that is part of the title. So the task, let me actually be serious and then end with a very nicely put theoretical part. So the task of the Sanskrit translator, in our opinions then, is to actually bridge the distances in time, space, and other domains, and to echo both our world and the Sanskrit world at the same time. So rather than, trying to transfer everything through translation, we actually aim to understand what can be carried over to the other side and what must be left behind or even sacrificed in these two worlds. And also just to quote Sherry Simons translating Montreal, so translation, of course, can be a tool for us to bridge two sides, right? There, and also the distance in between. But at the same time, I feel like, as Simon claims, and I quote, every act of translation is also a statement about human relations, about the ways in which languages, cultures, and individuals are the same or different. And in our translations, we seek to really reveal or make transparent that relations of similarity and more so differences as much as we can. So thank you so much. Also, thank you so much, our host, for today. And it's been a pleasure working with you and also to have this opportunity. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm blown away. I'll let some of you, if you have any questions, if you want to ask. Yeah.
Daniele, for you, I can't help thinking that this phenomenal display of being able to say two things at once looks like it's a fantastic showpiece, but is it beautiful? It just looks like, just something that makes your jaw drop, but what does it do beyond that?
I'm not sure. Yeah. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure also that beauty has to be the only aim of poetry and literature. It can be more. And the word beauty also, if I think about Sanskrit aesthetics, is not the first word that kind of tells you what poetry should be or what the readers should feel. It's more about different kinds of emotions. And I would say that the jaw drop can be one of those emotions. And again, it goes towards, of course, the idea of a riddle. And I'm not maybe the best person to defend this double narrations and this double meanings in poetry. I'm also not the highest fan, the greatest fan of them. But I do see the effect that they can have. And that's also an aesthetic effect, which maybe it's not only beautiful, and also, I don't know, I'm a fan of horror movies. Are they beautiful? No, but they give you something. They give you that's the best I can do.
I have a quick one, I hope. one of the tasks of the translators is to be invisible, right? But you can't quite be invisible in this kind of translations, like when you're doing with Spanish or something fairly straightforward. So how do you approach that?
Do you want to take this?
I mean, I guess just a short answer is it's not that we disagree with the idea that the translator has to be invisible. I just feel like it doesn't always have to be the case. So, and sometimes by actually showing yourself, your decisions and everything, I mean, also in a field like ours, we have to be quite conscious about like what is being translated and how it's being done, because it's not that we have so many people to work on translation and all the projects at the same time. So I feel like there's no use repeating the same mistakes and decisions. And also, you know, we should be clear about our agendas and what we want for real, so that we can produce more and not repeat ourselves in that sense. So that might answer your question in some way.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This was a really amazing talk. So it will be up on our website, on our YouTube video channel in a week. So if you want to revisit it. Thank you so much, everybody.